Hi Cougars, this is Mrs. Q. I hope you are enjoying your summer as much as I am. I'm excited to come to you today. I'm going to catch you up on our book. I'm going to be reading chapter 16. So get comfortable, get on a floaty, whatever you guys are doing this summer, and let's read chapter 16 together. The next morning, Dion felt better than he had for a while. He had found Gobi and he had finally gotten some sleep. Things were definitely looking up. He and Richard met up for breakfast. Then they went shopping. They managed to find a store with a pet selection and bought Gobi a leash and collar and some bowls and some dog food. That would have to do for now. Dion also spoke to Kiki. She was thrilled that he had found Gobi and happy to know that she could finally start helping him get the little dog to Edinburgh. Not that it was going to be easy. "We need to get her to a vet," Kiki told him. "Nirali didn't take care of any of that, so now we have to do it. Gobi will have to have her medical certificate before we can get approval for her to fly." "How long will that take?" Dion asked. "Maybe a week, maybe a month," Kiki replied. "It depends how long we have to wait to see the vet." Dion felt a little of his good mood slip away. "A week or a month or more? Are you sure we have to fly?" he tried. "Why don't we drive?" Kiki laughed. "It's a 30-hour drive and no hotel will let you take her inside with you," she reminded him. "Would you really want to leave her in the car?" No, Dion did not want to do that. It wasn't even remotely safe. "Besides," Kiki added, "I have a contact at an airline who says she might be able to get Gobi on a flight earlier than we thought." That would be great, Dion agreed. But he still had to figure out what he and Gobi were going to do for the next week or month until they could see the vet. First, though, he had to figure out what to do with her tonight. After talking with Kiki, Dion went down to the lobby to speak with the hotel manager about letting Gobi stay in the room with them. "No," the manager said. Dion tried again. Maybe the manager hadn't understood him. After all, the man had been very helpful during the search. He had even let them use a meeting room for interviews. "Can the dog stay in my room?" Dion repeated. "She's only little." He held up his hands to show Gobi's approximate size. "It'll be good publicity for you," he added. That was the real winner, he knew. The interview had already been all over television, local and national, and had shown the name of the hotel for the location. Surely if Dion was able to post that he and Gobi were safe here, that would drum up even more business for them. But the manager still shook his head. "No," he repeated. "We don't ever let dogs stay in the hotel." Then he paused. "But I would be willing to help," he said very softly. Great, Dion thought. The man wanted to be paid for helping. Well, it was worth it. But then the manager continued. "So perhaps the dog could stay in one of the rooms we use for staff training." That wasn't what Dion had expected, but still it was something. And if the training room was anything like the hotel's meeting rooms, that would be just fine. "Can I see it?" he asked. "Of course." The manager came out from behind the big front desk. Dion expected the man to lead him upstairs or down the hall, but instead he turned toward the front door. "What?" Then he paused and gestured for Dion to follow. Together they headed outside. They crossed the parking lot and walked toward a long, low building. Its front doors were swinging open and shut in the breeze. Dion thought maybe it was some sort of joke, but the manager wasn't laughing as he led the way inside. The inside was even worse than the outside. There were bottles of cleaner here and there, along with broken furniture and other debris. The floor was covered in trash and puddles. There were barely any windows, and the door didn't actually shut. The manager pushed the door with his shoulder and protested as he shoved it into place. But even then there was a large gap at the bottom. A dog Gobi's size would be able to slip right through that space. "I can't keep her here," Dion argued. "She'd run off." The manager shrugged. "So?" he said. Then he turned and walked away, back toward the hotel. Dion just watched him go. "What are we going to do?" Dion wondered out loud. They were in the car on the way back to Mr. Ma's. Luke Zen was driving again, and he and Richard were in the back. "We don't have any place else to put her." He had thought about asking Lu Zin to watch Gobi for him, and he knew that she would if she could. But she lived in a small apartment on the ground floor of a big building. There were too many people coming in and out all the time, and she said it wouldn't be safe. Dion believed her. The last thing he wanted was for Gobi to disappear again. "I can try to find a place for you to stay with her while you're here," Lu Zin offered, from the front as Richard translated. "But it may take a while." Dion sighed. "It has to be the hotel," he decided. "I need to be able to keep her with me." "We'll think of something," Richard promised. "We'll make it work." They pulled up to the gate and waited as Mr. Ma buzzed them in. A minute later, they were pulling outside the house. Dion had been worried on the way over. What if something had happened to Gobi while he was gone? What if Richard had been right and this was all a scam? What if they hit her again to get more money out of him? But Mr. Ma answered the door with a smile, and Dion relaxed. Then he was inside and headed toward the living room, and there was Gobi. She was okay. When Gobi had woken up that morning, she had been worried. Where was the tall man? But the two men from the night before were here. They seemed nice, and the tall man had been smiling at them, so Gobi figured it was okay. They fed her and gave her water, and she sat and waited. Then she heard a car pull up. There were voices outside. The one man went over to the front door, and when he came back, the tall man was with him. Gobi yipped and ran straight toward Dion as soon as she saw him. He picked her up and hugged her, and she licked his face. "Yes, I missed you too," he told her. "Don't worry, I'm not leaving again." He turned back to Mr. Ma. "Thank you so much for taking care of her," Dion told Mr. Ma and his son, "and for finding her." "It's our pleasure," Mr. Ma replied, and Richard translated. Mr. Ma's sons nodded as well, and he winked at Gobi. "I'd like to thank you properly," Dion continued. "We are going to have a special dinner tomorrow night for all the people who helped search. I'd like you and your family to come as well. Then I can present you with the reward money." This time, Mr. Ma shook his head. "We would be honored to attend," he replied, bowing, "but I do not need a reward." It was true that Mr. Ma's house was very nice. He and his son looked comfortable and well fed, but Dion was still surprised. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I promised a reward to anyone who found her, and that would be you and your son." Mr. Ma smiled. "You are very kind," he said, "but no, thank you." Dion shrugged. "I can't force you to take the money," he admitted, "but I will bring the check anyway, in case you change your mind." Then Mr. Ma's wife came in. She was carrying a tray with tea and pastries. Dion wanted to go back to the hotel with Gobi, but knew it would be rude to refuse. They had already done so much for him. So he sat on the couch again with Gobi in his lap. Richard sat on one side of him and Lu Xun on the other. The Ma's sat across from them, and Mrs. Ma poured tea for each of them. "Thank you," Dion said as he accepted his cup. He took a sip. It was good tea and very strong. "I never asked you what you do for a living," he said to Mr. Ma. Their host smiled. "I work in jade," he replied. "Oh, you're a sculptor?" Dion had seen jade pieces in the museums. They were always a beautiful shade of green and milky rather than clear. But the Ma's laughed. "No," Mr. Ma corrected. "I mean I deal in jade. I buy and sell it, for art and other uses." "Oh, sorry," Dion smiled. He felt even better about the Ma's now. They obviously didn't need the reward money. That meant Richard had been wrong about this being a scam. Or at least the Ma's finding Gobi wasn't part of it. He still didn't know about how Gobi had gotten loose in the first place. They sat and talked a little longer, then rose to go. But just as they were getting ready to leave, another man entered the house. Dion thought he looked familiar, but couldn't figure out why. The man marched over to Dion. "Hello," he said, holding out his hand. "I am Nirali's husband." Dion shook hands with him. "Hi," Dion said back. Nirali's husband laughed, and that was when Dion recognized him. He had been one of the drivers for the race, not the one whose car Dion had climbed into, though. The man released Dion's hand and turned to study Gobi. He knelt down and picked her up. She didn't growl, but she didn't lick or squeal either. "Yes," Nirali's husband declared. He turned Gobi around in his hands as if he were studying her from every side. "This is Gobi, all right." Then he handed her to Dion. "We tried our best to keep her safe for you," he said, "but she escaped. She's going to need a good fence when you get her home." Dion didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. "Let's go," Richard said. Dion nodded. Together they collected Lu Xun and said goodbye to the Ma's and left. Dion glanced back as they walked out and saw Mr. Ma's son smile at them. Then they were out the door, and Dion breathed a sigh of relief. Now they just had to figure out how to get Gobi into the hotel with him. I hope you guys enjoyed chapter 16. I want you to kind of think about, now that you've read that chapter, is what would you do? How would you take care of Gobi, and what choice do you think is going to make him the safest? All right, you guys enjoy your summer. I can't wait to see you in